that show was so popular, bars started having gong show night. And there was a bar that was having gong show night, and the first prize was $25. And my brother was saying, "Yeah, you should go down there and get that gong show and get that money."
Miss Jenkins. Miss Jenkins, my brother said, if I was walking down the street and I see Miss Jenkins right now, I'd punch her in the face.
8 years after his brother's death, Eddie Murphy finally cracked. In his new documentary, he sits alone, eyes glassy, and whispers the line that stopped millions cold. I think about Charlie every day, and I still can't forgive myself. Charlie Murphy, the Chappelle show legend, the man who roasted Prince and Rick James on national TV, died of leukemia in 2017. Eddie paid for the entire funeral, dropped hundreds of thousands, but when the casket was lowered, Eddie wasn't there. Not one public appearance, not one photo at the graveside. The brother who raised him, protected him, sacrificed for him, got buried without Eddie even showing his face. Hollywood whispered, fans raged, and for 8 long years, Eddie stayed silent. Until now. Today, we uncover the darkest part of their story. A childhood soaked in blood, silent betrayals, hidden guilt, and the one confession Eddie buried deeper than the grave. This isn't just family drama. This is the truth Eddie Murphy couldn't run from anymore. Listen close, because this one hits hard. It was a sweltering summer afternoon in Brooklyn, New York, August 22nd, 1969. The kind of sticky, heavy heat that makes your shirt cling to your back and the air feel thick enough to chew. Down on the cracked sidewalks, kids played stickball and radios blasted soul music from open windows. Inside the Murphy family apartment, though, the world was about to end. Charles Edward Murphy, only 28 years old, walked through the door like any other day. He was a transit cop by trade, but his real dream was the stage. He had that natural charm, the quick smile, the way of telling stories that made people lean in. Women loved him for it. One woman loved him too much. His girlfriend had been simmering for weeks, jealousy eating her alive. That afternoon, the dam broke. Words turned to screams. Screams turned to violence. She grabbed a kitchen knife and lunged. The first stab caught him in the chest. He staggered back, hands up, trying to calm her. She didn't stop. Blade after blade, blood spreading fast across his white shirt, dripping onto the worn wooden floor. The apartment filled with the wet, metallic smell of it. 17-year-old Charlie heard the commotion from the next room. He burst in, heart hammering. He saw his father bleeding, saw the woman wild-eyed and swinging again. Without thinking, Charlie charged. He grabbed her arm, tried to wrench the knife away. She shoved him hard, hard enough that he lost his footing and crashed to the floor. In that split second, she drove the blade one final time into Charles. The last breath left him in a ragged gasp. Blood sprayed. A hot arc of it hit Charlie square across the face, across his cheeks, into his open mouth. He tasted copper and salt. He sat there stunned, staring at his father's body crumpled against the wall, eyes already empty. The knife clattered to the ground. The woman stood frozen for a heartbeat, then ran. 8-year-old Eddie had been in the hallway. He peeked around the doorframe just in time to see it all. His big brother on the floor covered in blood, his father lifeless, the woman disappearing down the stairwell. He didn't scream. He just stood there, small and silent, eyes wide like he'd been turned to stone. That image burned into him forever, though years later he'd say the memories were blurry, like a dream he couldn't quite hold on to. The police came. Neighbors crowded the hallway. Someone wrapped a blanket around Charlie's shoulders while they questioned him. Eddie clung to his brother's leg, saying nothing. Their mother, Lillian, was already frail, sick with grief and her own health problems that had been getting worse for months. She collapsed when she heard. Doctors took her to the hospital that same night. Funeral arrangements were rushed. Charles was buried in early September, a small service under gray skies. Lillian couldn't even attend. She was too weak. Social services stepped in fast. With no one stable enough to care for them, Eddie and Charlie were placed in a temporary orphanage in Brooklyn. Cold hallways, metal beds, strict lights-out rules at 8 o'clock. Meals were bland oatmeal and thin soup. The other kids stared at the two brothers who never quite looked anyone in the eye. Charlie barely slept those first weeks. Every night he lay awake, listening to Eddie's soft breathing in the bunk below. He'd reach down and rest a hand on his little brother's shoulder, making sure he was still there. In the dark, the memory replayed over and over. The shove, the fall, the blood hitting his face like warm rain. He could still feel it drying on his skin, still taste it. That moment changed him. Something hardened inside the 17-year-old boy. He made a promise to himself, quiet and unbreakable. No one's ever gonna hurt Eddie again. Not while I'm breathing. Months dragged on. Lillian slowly recovered enough to take them back, but the damage was done. The apartment never felt safe again. Charlie grew up overnight, became the protector, the provider, the one who made sure Eddie had shoes that fit and food in his stomach. Eddie, still small and quiet, started mimicking voices and faces to get laughs, to push the darkness away. Comedy became his shield. Charlie watched it happen and let him, because he knew the kid needed something bright. But the trauma never really left either of them. Charlie carried the weight of that day like a stone in his chest. Every time he looked at Eddie, he saw the scared 8-year-old frozen in the doorway. Every time Eddie cracked a joke, Charlie heard the echo of their father's last breath. They didn't talk about it much. Murphy men weren't big on feelings, but the bond between them grew fierce, almost desperate. Charlie had sworn to protect his brother, and he kept that vow for the rest of his life. That single afternoon in August 1969 didn't just take their father. It stole their childhood, rewrote their futures, and planted seeds of guilt, loyalty, and unspoken pain that would follow them both for decades. Charlie became Eddie's guardian. Eddie became Charlie's reason to keep going. And neither of them ever forgot the blood on the floor, or the promise made in the dark of an orphanage bunk. Charlie pushed Eddie to the top, but shoved himself straight into the abyss. Fast forward to the summer of 1970, Brooklyn still smelled like grief. The apartment on Chauncey Street felt too quiet after their father's blood had been scrubbed from the floor. Charlie was 18, broad-shouldered, eyes already older than they should be. One morning in late July, he kissed Eddie on the forehead, told their mother he loved her, and walked into the Navy recruiting office on Flatbush Avenue. 6 years. That's how long he gave the Navy. 6 years of boot camp at Great Lakes, 6 years of steel decks and salt water, 6 years of learning how to take orders and how to protect what mattered. He came home in 1976, 24 years old, built like a linebacker, voice calm and low. Eddie was 15, already sneaking into comedy clubs, already doing voices that made strangers slap the table laughing. Charlie didn't say much. He just started showing up, driving Eddie to gigs in a beat-up Chevy, standing in the back of the room with arms folded, making sure nobody messed with his little brother. By 1982, Eddie was exploding. 48 Hours hit theaters like a bomb. Beverly Hills Cop was already in the works. Money started raining down. Eddie bought the big house in Englewood Cliffs, the cars, the entourage, and right in the middle of that whirlwind stood Charlie, 6'3", always in a dark suit, always one step behind Eddie, never asking for the spotlight. He was officially listed as personal security, but everybody on set knew the truth. Charlie was Eddie's shadow, his driver, his sounding board, his bouncer, his best friend, and, when Eddie needed it, his conscience. Late nights on the Beverly Hills Cop set in 1984, when Eddie was rewriting scenes at 3 a.m., Charlie would sit in the corner with a styrofoam cup of coffee, quietly saying, "That joke lands better if you pause one beat longer." Eddie listened. Always. Then came the offer that could have changed everything. It was the spring of 1985. The phone rang in Charlie's small apartment in Los Angeles. His agent, yes, he actually had one for a few months, was practically screaming. Universal just offered you the lead in a new action comedy. Big budget. They saw your tape from that small part you did last year. They want you, Charlie, not Eddie's brother. You. Charlie sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the script pages scattered across the floor. The role was perfect. Tough guy with heart, plenty of one-liners, the kind of part that launches careers. Shooting started in 3 months. Leading lady already attached. Big money. He drove straight to Eddie's house that night. Eddie was in the middle of a party, champagne flowing, girls laughing. Charlie pulled him into the kitchen, closed the door, and laid the script on the marble counter. Eddie flipped through it. His eyes lit up. "This is gold, man. You gotta take it." Charlie looked at his little brother, the kid he'd once shielded from their father's blood, and said the words that sealed his own fate. "Nah, you need this one more than I do." Eddie laughed at first, thought he was joking. Then he saw Charlie's face. "What are you talking about? You've been waiting for a shot like this." Charlie just shook his head. "You're about to be the biggest star in the world, Eddie. If I take this, they're going to pit us against each other. I don't want that noise. You take it. I'll be right here, same as always." Eddie tried to argue. Charlie wouldn't budge. 2 days later, the role went to Eddie instead. The movie became another monster hit. Eddie's star shot even higher. And Charlie? Hollywood quietly filed him under one label, Eddie Murphy's brother. The calls stopped coming. The agent disappeared. Offers dried up to nothing but walk-ons and Big Brother cameos. People on set started treating him like furniture, respectful but invisible. Charlie never complained out loud. He kept showing up for Eddie, kept smiling in the background of red carpets, kept saying, "Proud of you, man," every single time Eddie won another award. But inside, something broke. There were nights in 1986 and 87 when Charlie would sit alone in his apartment with the lights off, a bottle of Hennessy on the table, replaying that conversation in the kitchen. He could still see the look on Eddie's face, relief mixed with guilt. He could still hear his own voice giving the role away. The depression crept in slow and heavy, like fog rolling off the Pacific. He stopped answering the phone some days, started drinking earlier, lost weight. The man who had once charged into a knife fight for his father now felt like he was disappearing in his own life. Eddie never knew how deep it got. Charlie made sure of that. He'd show up the next morning, shaved, pressed, smiling, ready to drive Eddie to the next meeting, the next set, the next triumph. Always the protector, always the sacrifice. That one decision in the spring of 1985 didn't just cost Charlie a movie career. It cost him his own identity. From that moment on, no matter how many people laughed at his Chappelle's Show sketches years later, a part of Hollywood, and a part of Charlie himself, would always see him as just Eddie's big brother. He pushed Eddie all the way to the mountaintop and quietly walked himself off the cliff. If you're already feeling the weight of what Charlie gave up, hit that subscribe button right now, because Chapter 3 gets even darker, and you're not going to want to miss it. The jokes on Chappelle's Show weren't just funny. They were Charlie's way of screaming without opening his mouth. Cut to the fall of 2003. Los Angeles was buzzing, the air thick with weed smoke and ambition. Charlie Murphy had just turned 43, still towering, still sharp, but carrying the kind of quiet that comes from years of swallowing everything. He stepped onto the Chappelle's Show set for the first time, wearing a plain black t-shirt and jeans, no entourage, no ego. Dave Chappelle took one look at him and said, "Man, you look like you've got stories." Charlie just smiled that slow, dangerous smile. "Yeah, I got a couple." What came next changed comedy forever. The Charlie Murphy's True Hollywood Stories sketches dropped like grenades. First, Rick James. Cocaine is a hell of a drug. Then Prince beating him at basketball in high heels and purple raincoat, then busting his ass with a guitar. The audience lost their minds. Eddie watched from afar, laughing harder than anyone, because he knew every word was true. Those stories weren't made up. Charlie lived them, and he told them with the kind of deadpan rage that made people cry laughing. But here's the part nobody talks about. Behind every punchline was a wound Charlie never let show. Rewind to 1987. 2 years after Charlie handed Eddie that lead role he could have taken himself. The depression had settled in like black mold. Charlie was drinking heavy, sleeping little, staring at walls for hours. One night in late October, he showed up at Eddie's mansion unannounced. Eddie was in the middle of a script read-through. Charlie waited in the kitchen until everyone left. When the door finally closed, Charlie laid it out flat. "I need help, man. I'm drowning." Eddie looked up from the pages, surprised. "What's going on?" Charlie's voice cracked for the first time in years. "I gave you that movie. I gave you everything, and now I can't even get a call back. They don't see me. They see Eddie's brother. That's it. That's all I am now." Eddie froze. The guilt hit him like a freight train. He stood up, walked over, put a hand on Charlie's shoulder. "You're more than that. You know you are." Charlie looked him dead in the eye. "Then why don't you act like it?" Silence stretched so long it hurt. Eddie finally spoke. "What do you need? Money? A loan? I got you." Charlie laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "I don't want your money, Eddie. I want you to stop acting like I'm invisible. One time, just one time. Look at me like I'm your brother, not your shadow." Eddie couldn't hold the gaze. He looked down at the script, then back up. "I'm trying, man. I swear I'm trying." Charlie nodded once, slow. "Yeah, I know." He walked out that night without another word. Eddie didn't follow. That was the first real crack. Years passed. Eddie became a billionaire. Charlie faded further into the background until Chappelle gave him a microphone. Those sketches, they weren't just comedy. They were Charlie reclaiming pieces of himself. Every time he said, "Prince slapped the shit out of me," he was saying something else underneath. "I was somebody once, before I gave it all to you." And Eddie knew it. The night the Rick James sketch aired, January 22, 2004, Eddie called Charlie at 2 a.m. Charlie picked up on the first ring. "You killed it, man," Eddie said, voice thick. "You really killed it." Charlie was quiet for a long beat. "Thanks." Another beat. Then Charlie dropped the bomb. "You know why I told that story, right?" Eddie laughed nervously. "Because it's hilarious?" "No," Charlie said, "because I needed people to remember I existed before I was just Eddie's brother. And I needed you to hear it too." Click. The line went dead. Eddie sat there in the dark holding the phone, chest tight. He didn't call back that night, or the next week. Charlie never brought it up again. But the resentment didn't vanish. It just went underground, quiet, patient, lethal. Fast forward to 2015. Charlie was already sick, though nobody outside the family knew yet. Leukemia, creeping in slow, stealing strength day by day. He still showed up for Eddie when he could, still drove, still stood in the background, still smiled for the cameras. But the body was betraying him. One afternoon in early spring, Charlie asked Eddie to come over to his place. Just the two of them. No entourage, no jokes. Eddie showed up late. Traffic, meetings, the usual excuses. Charlie was sitting on the couch, thinner than Eddie remembered, oxygen tank humming beside him. He didn't waste time. "I'm dying, Eddie." Eddie's face collapsed. "Don't say that. I'm saying it because it's true, and I need you to hear this before I go." Charlie leaned forward, eyes burning. "I forgave you a long time ago for taking that role. I forgave you for not seeing me. But what I can't forgive is that you never once said thank you. Not really. Not like a man. Not like a brother." Eddie opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Charlie kept going, voice low and steady. "I bled for you. I gave up my shot so you could have yours. I stood in every shadow so you could shine. And all I ever wanted was one moment where you looked at me and said, 'Charlie, I see you, and I'm proud of who you are.'" Tears slipped down Charlie's cheeks, first time Eddie had ever seen him cry. "But you never did." Eddie's throat closed. He reached for Charlie's hand. Charlie pulled back. "Don't," Charlie whispered. "Not now." Eddie left that day with the weight of 1,000 unsaid words crushing his chest. Charlie died 2 years later, April 12, 2017. Eddie wasn't at the hospital the week before, wasn't at the funeral, wasn't anywhere near the grave. He sent flowers, big ones, paid for everything, but he never stepped foot inside the chapel. Because sometimes the guilt is so heavy, you can't even carry it to the grave. Those true Hollywood stories? They weren't just laughs. They were Charlie's last desperate way of saying, "I was here, I mattered, and you let me disappear." Eddie paid a fortune for the funeral, but he couldn't bring himself to look at the casket. By early 2017, the leukemia had already won. It wasn't the fast, dramatic kind that announces itself with headlines. It was the slow, complicated version, relentless, unpredictable, turning healthy cells against the body until nothing works anymore. Charlie was 56, then 57. He fought quietly, the same way he'd fought everything else in his life. No complaints, no spotlight, just endurance. The decline accelerated in the winter months. Doctors in Los Angeles adjusted treatments, increased transfusions, tried experimental drugs. Charlie's weight dropped. His voice grew thinner. The man who once charged into knife fights and stood 6'3" in the background of Hollywood parties now needed help walking to the bathroom. Oxygen tubes became permanent. Hospital stays stretched longer. One afternoon in late March 2017, Charlie was lucid enough to pick up the phone himself. The room was dim, machines beeping softly in the background. He dialed Eddie's number. It rang 4 times before Eddie answered. Charlie's voice was weak but clear. "Hey, it's me. They say this might be it. I'd like to see you one more time, before it's too late." On the other end, Eddie was in Atlanta, on the set of a film that would never be remembered. The director had just called 5 more minutes until the next take. Crew members milled around, laughing, adjusting lights. Eddie glanced at his watch, then at the script in his hand. "I'm right in the middle of shooting, man," Eddie said. "Schedule's locked. They're not going to stop for anything. I'll come as soon as I wrap this week." Charlie was quiet for a long moment. The oxygen hissed through the mask. "Okay," he finally said. "I understand." The call ended. Eddie hung up and went back to the scene. He delivered his lines perfectly. The director yelled, "Cut," and the crew applauded. Eddie smiled, thanked everyone, then walked to his trailer and sat alone for 10 minutes, staring at the wall. He told himself he'd fly out in a few days. He told himself Charlie would hold on. He told himself a lot of things. He never made the trip. Charlie slipped into a coma 3 days later. On April 12, 2017, at 1:17 p.m. Pacific Time, he stopped breathing. 57 years old. The same age his father would have been if he'd lived past that bloody August afternoon in 1969. The news hit Eddie like a delayed explosion. He was still in Atlanta when the call came. He didn't cry in front of anyone. He just nodded, thanked the person who told him, then walked outside and stood in the parking lot until the sun went down. When he finally got back to Los Angeles, the arrangements were already in motion. Eddie handled the money, quietly, efficiently. He covered the full cost of the service, nearly $300,000. The church in the valley, the best florists in the city, the catering, the musicians, the plotted forest lawn. He made sure every detail was perfect. Charlie would go out like royalty, even if the king himself wasn't there to see it. The funeral happened on a clear Saturday morning. Hundreds came. Dave Chappelle stood in the front row, eyes red. Cedric the Entertainer, George Lopez, D.L. Hughley, old Navy buddies, childhood friends from Brooklyn, they all filled the pews. Photos of Charlie cycled on screens. Young Charlie in uniform, Charlie laughing on Chappelle's show, Charlie and Eddie as kids with their arms around each other. The eulogies were honest, loving, raw. People spoke about the protector, the comedian, the man who gave everything and asked for nothing. Eddie wasn't there. He stayed home in his gated compound. Shades drawn, phone on silent. While the choir sang and the casket was carried out, Eddie sat in a dark room replaying the last call in his head. The weak voice, the simple request. "I'd like to see you one more time." And his own answer, "I'm right in the middle of shooting." The guilt didn't arrive in waves. It arrived as a permanent weight. It settled in his chest and never left. He kept the rule he'd told people about for years. He doesn't do funerals. Only two in his entire life. His father's when he was a boy, and his stepfather's much later. No others. Not even his brothers. He said it was about protecting himself from pain. He said grief was private. He said he honored people by paying for their send-offs, by making sure they were taken care of. But the truth was simpler and uglier. He couldn't face the casket, couldn't face the people who would look at him and wonder why the little brother Charlie had raised and protected hadn't shown up. Couldn't face the final proof that he had failed the one person who never failed him. Months passed, then years. Eddie kept working, kept smiling for cameras, kept saying in interviews that he missed Charlie, that Charlie was the source of some of his biggest laughs. The words were true, but they were also safe. They didn't touch the real wound. At night, though, the silence was different. The house was too big, too quiet. Eddie would sit up in bed, staring into the dark, seeing Charlie's face on the hospital pillow, hearing the last "okay" before the line went dead. He saw the church he never entered, the flowers he never touched, the grave he never visited. He had paid for everything. He had given Charlie the grandest exit money could buy. But he hadn't given him the one thing Charlie asked for in the end, his presence. And that refusal became the regret Eddie Murphy carried alone, day after day, year after year, long after the funeral flowers had withered and the headlines had moved on. Eddie cried and finally admitted the pain he'd buried for 8 long years. The year was 2025. 8 years had passed since Charlie's death, long enough for the headlines to fade, the tributes to quiet down, and the world to assume Eddie had moved on. Then came Being Eddie, the documentary nobody expected. No flashy promos, no big celebrity guests, just Eddie, alone in a sparsely lit room, facing a camera that refused to let him hide. The film wasn't meant to be a confession. It started as a career retrospective. Clips from 48 Hours, Beverly Hills Cop, Coming to America, the stand-up specials that made him untouchable. But when the interviewer asked about family, about loss, the tone shifted. The lights dimmed. Eddie's voice softened. And for the first time in decades, the armor cracked. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "Some of my biggest laughs in my life are Charlie," he said. The words came out steady at first, almost casual. Then he paused. "I miss my brother." The camera stayed tight on his face. No cutaway, no music swell, just Eddie, breathing unevenly. "I think about Charlie every day," he continued. "Every single day. Then came the moment millions would clip and share. Eddie's eyes filled. One tear escaped, then another. He didn't wipe them away. He didn't laugh it off or change the subject. He let them fall. "This is me," he whispered. "Totally vulnerable. Just me." He tibetted a shaky breath. Charlie wasn't just my brother. After our father was killed, Charlie became the second father. He was 17 years old, covered in Dad's blood, and he still made sure I ate, made sure I slept, made sure nobody hurt me. He gave up his own life so I could have mine. Navy, security, assistant, whatever I needed, he was there. Eddie's voice dropped lower, and I let him live in my shadow. I took the spotlight, I took the roles, I took the glory, and I never once stopped to say, "Charlie, I see you. Thank you." The room felt smaller. The interviewer stayed silent. Eddie kept going, words spilling out like they'd been locked behind a dam for too long. "The darkest truth, the thing I've carried since the day he died, is that I don't deserve the love he gave me. He asked for one thing at the end, one visit, one goodbye. And I said no, I was busy, shooting a movie nobody will remember. I told myself I'd go later. There was no later." He shook his head slowly. "I paid for the funeral. I made sure everything was perfect. But I couldn't walk into that church. I couldn't look at the casket. Because if I did, I'd have to face the fact that I failed him. The one person who never failed me. And I wasn't there when he needed me most." A long silence followed. Eddie looked directly into the lens, eyes red but steady. "Charlie forgave me before he died. He told me so, but I haven't forgiven myself, and I don't know if I ever will." The documentary didn't end on that note. It moved on to lighter memories. Charlie's laugh, the Prince story, the way he'd roast Eddie in private and still brag about him in public. But that confession stayed with every viewer. It was raw, it was real, and it was 8 years overdue. When the credits rolled, people didn't talk about the career highlights. They talked about the tears, the admission, the brother who gave everything, and the superstar who couldn't give back the one thing that mattered. Eddie had built an empire on charm, on timing, on never letting the mask slip. But in that quiet room in 2025, he finally let it fall. Not for sympathy, not for headlines, for Charlie. Because some truths are too heavy to carry alone forever, and some regrets are too deep to ever fully bury. The story ends here, but the questions don't. Eddie Murphy finally broke his silence. He cried on camera. He admitted the guilt. He called Charlie his second father and confessed he never felt worthy of the love his brother gave him without question. 8 years of silence. A funeral he paid for but never attended. A last phone call he ignored. A promise of protection made in blood that Eddie couldn't return when it mattered most. So let me ask you this, and be brutally honest in the comments. If you were Eddie, would you have shown up at that hospital bed? Would you have walked into that church and faced the casket, or would the guilt have kept you frozen at home, just like it did him? And the darkest question of all, do you think Eddie will ever truly forgive himself? Or will Charlie's voice keep echoing in his head every single night for the rest of his life? Drop your raw thoughts below, no filter. Did this story shock you? Hit that. Like if it did. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because Hollywood's darkest family secrets are just getting started. Next time, we go even deeper. Rest in peace, Charlie Murphy. And Eddie, wherever you are, I hope you finally find some peace too.